Gird your loins with truth, St. Paul urges us in the 6th chapter of his letter to the Ephesians. Put on the breastplate of righteousness. And he goes on to urge us to take up the whole armor of God. So clearly, the Christian faith is, in a certain sense, a fighting faith. And I think that we owe our neighbors a clear witness to the truth that we hold within us. And that truth is not only a truth about the soul, but also a truth about the public world in which we live. And given the fact that the Christian faith is, in a fundamental way, a fighting faith, one ought not to shrink necessarily from being called a culture warrior. That is not necessarily something that one should shrink from. But it seems to me that when I want to talk about this afternoon, we have to contend against the powers, the worldly powers of our time with the right spirit. Otherwise, we betray the gospel even as we seek to serve it. And so it's very interesting that in that 6th chapter to the Ephesians, within the armor of God that St. Paul urges us to take up, St. Paul includes the equipment, he says, the equipment of the gospel of peace. And so at the same time that I think our Christian witness has a distinctive war-making quality, we really are in there to try to make a difference and to change the way things are. It should also be a peacemaking project, not simply a war-making project. I'm a Catholic, and in the Catholic tradition, Paul VI, who was Pope at the end of the Second Vatican Council, spoke of our mission to build a civilization of love. I think that can be sometimes overly ambitious, and there's a danger in having the wrong sort of ambition in public life. I think part of humility is knowing the limits of what can be accomplished in public life. But there's something right about that image, the image of a civilization of a love, or at least a civilization leavened by love, I think is a good goal. So, how then do we wield the sword of truth? How do we wield the sword of truth in the right sort of way with the right spiritual discipline? And I want to kind of walk through a few what I think are biblical passages that for me have been ways to discipline my own war-making, if you will, as I sally forth month after month on the pages of First Things magazine to try to make a case for what I think Christians ought to fight for in the public square. Now, the most obvious one, which really reinforces, also comes from the letter of the Ephesians 4:15, speak the truth in love. So I'm going to try to spell out other biblical passages that I think help us understand what it means to speak the truth in love. Starting point, Matthew 7:12, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, the golden rule. This is not a counsel, it seems to me, to niceness per se. I want to know what other people are thinking, so why shouldn't I do unto others what I would have them do unto me, which is that I would actually speak my mind. But on the other hand, I don't want my views to be distorted or misrepresented. And it strikes me as a basic principle of Christian engagement in the public square that we try to be fair in the way we characterize other people, the people with whom we disagree with, their positions. I don't like to have my motives impugned, and therefore we ought not to impugn the motives of others. And I don't want to be lied to or manipulated, and with political rhetoric that's dishonest or in some way simplistic. And so we, I think, also ought to do unto others as we would have them do unto us, and not to distort, manipulate, or spin. So I think that's the kind of ground basic ground floor of the way I think of this. Another passage is helpful, Romans 3:8, which roughly translated says, "Do not do evil, that good might come." One of the great temptations in public life is to have your eye on a supreme good. Perhaps it is the sanctity of life that's the supreme good that you're deeply committed to, or a restoration of the family, or justice for the poor, whatever it might be, that it is very dangerous when we think that the end justifies the means, and that's essentially what St. Paul is warning against. And I think to dig more deeply into this sense here, it's an awareness that we have to accept the limits of argument and persuasion. I think Jennifer Fitzgerald mentioned that, was it you, Jennifer, that mentioned that people are not transformed? Was it Deshauna that said people are not transformed by arguments, or they have to know we love them. Yes, but I think, were you the one that quoted, was it, I can't remember who said it, but that we have to be adequately disposed to be able to accept an argument. I mean, one of the most humbling things about my life as a college professor was the growing awareness of the impotence of arguments, that they so rarely persuade. And to recognize the limits of our capacity to persuade, I think, is very important, so that we don't then turn and resort to illicit means. We just have to accept the recalcitrant finitude and fallen character of us all. And that includes the people that we're contesting with in public life. And the ability to have this kind of humility, which I think is very important in public life. Otherwise, we can be very tempted to try to manipulate rhetoric or manipulate events or manipulate movements in order to try to overstep the limitations of our fellow citizens to ensure the outcomes that we are very confident are for the best. Do not do evil, that good might come. It's a very important principle. Third principle, another one that I've had a hard time digesting or conforming to, and that is James 3, the discipline of the tongue, that unruly steed of the tongue that can do so much damage. So discipline of the tongue, such a small member, but so capable of sowing ill will and disruption in public life. I think that's another important biblical principle that we need to focus on. So it strikes me those three are kind of what I would call kind of principles of civility. I would think of here that I think are kind of key for us. The golden rule: do not do evil that good might come. Don't lie, thinking that will be justified by the fact that you'll achieve the desired outcome in politics. And then finally, a discipline of the tongue. So hard in the passions of the moment, in the passions of political debate, not to resort to to sharp words. I was at a debate in Europe recently, and needless to say, things kind of turned to the immigration question, and the interlocutors who disagreed, next thing you know, we were talking about, there was the reductio ad Hitlerium, the reduction to Adolf Hitler, which is, I think, something we always need to discipline ourselves against, reducing our political opponents to paragons of evil. So it takes a certain discipline of the tongue in the heat of the moment not to reach for that really telling blow that you can use rhetorically. So now, two more principles that are more, I think, in line, more distinctive to Christianity. I think any well-meaning person ought to recognize the importance of the golden rule, the notion that the ends don't justify the means, and the importance of having a civil tongue rather than an uncivil tongue. And this fourth principle then is John 18:36. when Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world." Now, this strikes me as the profoundest source of Christian humility in politics. Our public and political witness matters. It matters for our fellow citizens, it matters for the future of our nation, but it does not matter ultimately. And that this is hugely important for making sure that the temperature doesn't reach a boiling point in public engagement. Jesus says, "My kingdom is not of this world." And part of the crisis of our time is that in a secular society that loses a strong sense of the transcendent, it's very tempting to make a god of politics. And woe unto us should we fall into that idolatry, because we should know better than to make an idol of politics. And this is not a posture of political neutrality. Instead, it's a proper recognition of the limits of all worldly politics. One of the crises, I think, of the modern political imagination is the difficulty of accepting limits, the limits and the tragic character of human existence, and the fact that we cannot solve all problems, and that this is part of this contributes to the frenzied character of public life. This sense that ultimately the ultimate disposition of human beings is decided in this world, in this realm. And I think the Christian notion that no, our ultimate weal and woe is a matter in God's hands is a very powerful puts a very powerful limit on our political zeal. Final biblical principle, Matthew 10:16. This is one of my favorite ones. Be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove. I wish Jesus had told us when to be wise as a serpent and when to be innocent as a dove. But I think it's a useful biblical passage because I think it has a double-edged sword. It has two edges to it. One, beware a kind of political Pharisaism that will shrink from any coalition, that insists on purity down the line in every political engagement. No, we have to sometimes be wise as serpents, and we have to make coalition and alliance with people who are not clean, right? By biblical principles, they are unclean. But we have to make, and this is why, I think it's wrong to anguish over the obvious imperfections of our major political parties, or to anguish over much against the obvious imperfections of our political candidates. That we need to be wise as serpents and recognize whom we think best advances a Christian vision of the future and do what is needed. But at the same time, we need to be innocent as doves. And I think here, is where we need to not be overly strategic. So there are times when we should just say what it is that we think is true. That we should speak in the public realm with a kind of naivete, a kind of holy indifference to how we are heard by others. So this is very difficult, right? Because a part of being wise as a serpent is knowing your audience and knowing what can be heard and what cannot be heard. But Jesus tells us to do that, to be wise as serpents, but he also tells us to be innocent as doves. And we should beware if in all of our engagements in public life, we are never just saying it out loud, the whole picture, our vision, even though we know that after we say it, like, oh boy, this is going to get me in trouble. So I do think we need to be innocent as doves as well as wise as serpents. So those are my 5 biblical principles for how to speak the truth in love. Golden rule, don't do evil that good might come. Discipline your tongue. recognize that the kingdom that we seek is not of this world, and to be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove. But I want to conclude on a somewhat different point here in the final couple of minutes. And I was really gratified to what Ron Sider's emphasis on what the church can do in our moment. Because it seems to me that the proper form of love, or if not the primary form of love in public life, are not our zealous actions on behalf of those who are in need, important as that may be, nor are they necessarily heroic gestures of love for our enemies, crucial as that may be in some instances. Instead, the primary form of love in civic life is civic friendship. Civic friendship is the primary form of love. And it has natural forms and it has supernatural forms, to use a distinction that we Catholics like to use. The natural forms are the natural forms of solidarity that we as human beings are attracted to. Family, first and foremost. People learn what it means to sacrifice for the common good in family life. A child sees parents putting differences aside or overcoming conflict for the good of the family. That's their first political experience in life, of sacrifice for the common good. And it's based on the union of the man and the woman, their friendship in matrimony. Patriotism is another form of civic friendship. The sense that when it's all said and done, we're really all in this together. So friendship is based on a common devotion, shoulder to shoulder, seeking a common devotion. And then civic organizations, local communities, these are all natural forms of civic friendship. And I think that's the primary expression of love in public life. And then there's the supernatural unity of the church in our common devotion to Christ. And it strike me with Ron Sider rightly recognized that when we get together and we debate, disagree about politics, we trust that we both share that common devotion, which transcends our differences. I believe we live in a dissolving age where the institutions and fora in which we unite together in civic friendship are increasingly weakened. We can talk maybe in the Q&A about why I think that they're dissolving. But I think it's really important in our time. There are many biblical principles, and I think that we can, profit from thinking them through. But I do think that one thing that Christians really need to think about contributing to our current political distemper is some renewal and re-strengthening of the bases for us to develop in our communities these bonds of civic friendship, to resist the dissolving tendencies of our age. Thank you very much.